We all want great sounding drums. Back when I was in high school, I was taking drum lessons at a music store, and when I would go home and play the drums, I knew that my drums didn't sound as good as the ones that I used when I was at my lessons. And I asked my drum teacher, how do I make my drums sound better? And what he said was, you have to tune your drums. I said, how do you tune your drums? And he said, well, you have to learn how to tune by ear. Now, this is still frustrating to me because I teach guitar lessons, and when I'm teaching someone how to tune their guitar, the last thing I would ever say is, well, you need to learn how to tune your guitar by ear. When you're starting off and you're learning a new instrument or you're learning something like the drums, your ears don't know a whole lot of what you're listening to. You may not even be able to recognize the difference between a snare drum and a rack tom, or the snare drum and your kick drum. You're all learning new stuff. Well, when it comes to tuning the guitar, we have things like floor pedals. So you can plug your guitar into this pedal and it will tell you if your string is in tune or not. It'll turn green if it's in tune, it'll be red if it's out of tune. We also have clip-on tuners. So clip-on tuners will go on the headstock of the guitar. You can pluck a string and it will tell you if you're in tune. And I always wondered, why don't we have as much talk about clip-on drum tuners as we do clip-on guitar tuners? For years, I've made these videos every now and then about the TuneBot. The TuneBot is just what I was talking about with the guitar, but it's made specifically for drums. This is the TuneBot Studio. It clips onto the side of your drums, whether that be a snare drum, kick drum, floor tom, rack tom. Clip it onto the side of your drum, hit anywhere near a lug, and it will read out a number. And that number is the frequency or the hertz that that lug is resonating at. So if it reads something like 300 hertz, and then the next lug reads something like 297, you know that you need to turn that 297 up so that it matches 300. Now, right off the bat, this video is going to be quite the deep dive on getting this snare drum to sound as great as it can possibly sound. I don't mean to skip over anything at all. I want to do this as much on a beginner level as possible because you yourself might have been told for years that you just have to learn to do it by ear, and you never had anybody tell you just, here's what you need to do. So today's video is all about that, how to get a great sound out of our snare drums. I've got some other tips and tools that we're going to be using to get a great snare drum sound, some recommendations out there. My name's Chris Green. My whole channel is about music production tips and advice. The best thing you can do, because YouTube may not think this is a spicy enough video to promote, hit the like and subscribe buttons, all that stuff. Engagement wise, it helps to promote the video, so I appreciate it if you would take the time to do that. With all that being said, let's jump into the snare drum and get this thing tuned up. First of all, this is my Masters Maple snare drum from Pearl. This one is an SST. My wife got this for me a few Christmases ago. It is a maple snare drum. There's nothing particularly fancy about it. It's just a great all-around snare drum. I believe it can do all sorts of genres. I can get everything I need out of it for doing this rock, country, or praise and worship type of music. Very satisfied with this one. I've got other snare drums that are more aluminum, and those are the ones that typically come with like the Tama and the Sonar kit that I have, where it's like a beginner set. Just so you know, price-wise, this one snare drum will cost me about as much as one of those starter drum kits. So when you get a drum kit, it's great when it comes with a snare drum, toms, and kick drum. But if you're spending like $500 for your entire drum kit, you might want to look at upgrading your snare. You don't have to go crazy though, because this one I believe used cost about $350 or $400, but it's very versatile. I can use it all over the place. As I mentioned before, I've done videos on the TuneBot Studio where I break down how to tune your drums to a very specific note value. This is not a waste of time. If you want to take the time to try to tune your snare to G, tune your toms to A and D, that can be very satisfying as well when you tune your drums to the key of the song that you're recording. What I'm going to be doing today is kind of more of a reflection of where I'm at in life. I want to tune my snare drum so that it is more satisfying to hit and that it gives me a satisfying bounce back regardless of the note that it's tuned to. So if my snare drum makes an F, great. If it makes an E, that's totally fine. I want it to be in tune with itself. I want it to have a pleasant ring to it, but I'm more concerned about if I tighten it too much, it's going to mimic this desk. So if I take this drumstick and I hit my desk, I can feel a vibration in my hand and going up my arm telling me that that is not very satisfying. If you tune your drum too tight, when you hit it, it will almost be the same as hitting a piece of furniture, and that's not very fun. I've played drums in the past where I've tuned them with the TuneBot, not thinking at all about note values in relation to each other, but I tuned it in a way that I wanted to have a nice bounce back, and that's what I'm going to today. Of course, I'll let you know all the settings that I've got on my TuneBot when we end up with that. The first thing I need to do though is get my drum key out, and I need to take the head off of the top and bottom of the snare drum, and we'll start with the top. Of course, I need a drum key, so in this video I'll be using this one. Anytime you can find one with a little hole in it that you can put it on your keychain, you'll be glad you did, especially if you're a traveling drummer. Get one of these that you can put on your keychain. For this video, I'm going to set the snare drum on this drum throne. I just want to make sure whatever side that I'm tuning, I've got the other side muffled so it's not making any noise. So I'm going to start with the top of the snare drum. I'm going to go around and remove the head completely. All right, so I've got the drum head removed. I'm going to put this back on. This is a coated ambassador from Remo. Again, it's very much a generic drum head. It's going to be great for getting a good sound. There are some that are specifically made for snare drums that have holes cut out all the way around. Those are great if you don't have something like moon gel or gaff tape. They'll really give you a drier sound on your snare drum. They'll take away some of that ringing so you don't have to use a bunch of muffling later on. A coated ambassador is a good way to go. Either way, even for your toms and your kick drum as well. Whenever you start to see the coating, specifically wherever you're hitting the drum a lot, when you start to see the coating kind of flake off and you start to see the clear coat underneath, that's probably the time you need to change your drum heads. I'm not a person, just like when it comes to guitar strings, I'm not somebody changing the drum heads all the time. This one looks pretty good to me. I'm just going to take it off and make sure it's seated properly on the top of the drum. Make sure it's sitting down nice and snug, and then you want to put your lugs and the hoop back on. Now, when it comes to the lugs, I'm not the person to put the grease or oil on the lugs themselves. I understand that that can get rid of some of the dust and grime that can make your lugs difficult to turn later on. I've not had any trouble with this snare drum, and I've had it for over 10 years, so it's doing just fine. In fact, Eric Valentine, if you haven't checked out his channel on YouTube, he's done recordings for Smash Mouth, Third Eye Blind, all sorts of rock bands out there. He actually likes it when a drum lug gets all gunky and stuff, because if you think about it, the more gunky it is, the more it's going to be locked in place, so you don't have it slipping all over. If you grease up your lugs, then you might have problems when you're hitting your snare drum and stuff with it slipping out of tune. The more it's locked in, the more it should stay in tune. I'm not 100% on that, but I'm not ever putting any sort of grease on any of the lugs. I'm just going to go around and put each of the lugs inside, and I'm going to make sure that they are finger tight. By finger tight, it's essentially just meaning these are as tight as I can turn them with my fingers. Okay, my snare drum is now finger tight, meaning as I reach on each of the lugs, I'm not able to turn these at all. I'm going to give the drum a push on the middle, just to see if I can get it to sit in place. As I'm using the TuneBot, I'm going to use this mallet. If you don't have one of these mallets, these are pretty handy for doing cymbal swells, but also for tuning. It's going to give me a more accurate representation of what the lug is. So with the TuneBot, I essentially just want to turn it on, and I'm going to seat it next to a couple of the lugs. Let's see where we're at with finger tight. That's reading 77 hertz, which is very low, especially for a snare drum. I know most of the time snare drums, the top head is somewhere around 300 hertz, so we're at 77. 78. 78. Obviously, I'm not going to keep my drum at 78, but I want to switch to my Vic Firth. These are 5AN nylon tip sticks. I'm just going to hit the snare drum because, again, I'm not going for a specific note. I know it's not going to be at 78 hertz, but I want to hit the drum and just see how it feels. It's not bad. It's very tubby, I would say. It doesn't have any sort of bounce back to it. It is kind of like hitting a pillow because it is so loose right now. So now that I've got my drum key, I'm going to go around and just start off with maybe a half of a turn. So that's right at 12 o'clock. I want to go from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. That's a quarter turn. This is a half turn, okay? Quarters and halves. We're gonna start off doing a half turn on each of the lugs, and I wanna make sure I do some sort of star pattern so that I'm bouncing from one side to the other and not going around circular. This snare drum has 10 lugs, so the way that I'm going to do is I'm gonna start at the top, then I'm gonna jump across, and then I'm gonna go 3 lugs to the right. 1, 2, 3. I'll tune that one, jump across, tune that one, 1, 2, 3, jump across, 1, 2, 3, jump across, 1, 2, 3, jump across, 1, 2, 3, back to where we started. And back to the beginning. So I've given each of these a half turn. Let's see where we're at frequency-wise. About 181, 185. Let me check this side here. 179. So now I want to make sure this is where the tune bot comes into play, because this may not be where I'm tuning the top of the snare drum, but I want to make sure all the lugs are relatively in the same spot. So now I'm just going to spot check each of the tunings. I'm going to go to this lug up here next to the tune bot. I'm going to hit, see where we're at. It says 179. I'll move to the next one in line. 178. So I give it just barely a turn at all. Third one's at 180. Turn it down a little. Keep working our way around. 184, let's go down. 180, 182. All right, so each of the lugs is right at about 180. If you're only moving like 1 hertz to 5 hertz on each of the lugs, I don't think it matters too much that you have to jump around like we were doing earlier. But if you're just doing those little changes, just make sure they're all relatively around the same area. This is at 180. Let's see how it feels. Definitely got more of a bounce. There feels like there's some kickback on the snare drum. So I'm gonna see if I can get it a little bit tighter, but without losing that bounce that I'm getting. So now I want to go back to the technique where I'm jumping across and then over to the right, 3, across, over 3. And this time I'm just gonna give it a quarter turn. So we're essentially going from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock. I'm gonna check my tuning. Now we're reading about 228. So we've gone finger tight, half of a turn, and then a quarter of a turn. I'm gonna get these to 230. See if we can do that. I didn't have to turn any of those. We're at 230 all the way around. I do feel like I'm losing some of the bounce back, but we haven't factored in the bottom of the snare drum yet. Let's do 1/8 of a turn, maybe get it from, it's at A sharp right now. Let's just get it up to B and see how it does with the bottom head as well. So if at 230 is on its way to A sharp, let's give it 1/8 of a turn. And I'll go all the way around. It's like a B is right at 247 hertz. So we really didn't go that much higher than finger tight, half of a turn, quarter of a turn, and then somewhere between 1/8 of a turn and 1/16 of a turn. And that ends us up at 247. I'll probably leave it at 247, make sure I'm 247 all the way around. And then we'll tune the bottom head to be 1/4 above 247. So 1/4 above the note B would be an E. So we need an E above B. On the bottom end of the snare, the first thing you need to do is eliminate these snare wires. You don't have to take them off all the way, but you need to loosen the throttle so that you can put a stick underneath the snare wires so that when you hit the bottom snare head, it shouldn't be a factor. You don't want to hear any of the snare wires ringing out. I have not removed the bottom of the snare drum head. The bottom head of the snare drum is not being hit, and for the most part, if you have a good bottom snare head, you can pretty much keep it the whole time. The ones that come stock on some of the more affordable kits, you at least need to upgrade to some sort of Evans or Remo clear-coated bottom snare head. I think that would go a long way, but you don't have to replace it unless you're hitting it for some reason. I'm just going to put the tune bot on the bottom snare head and see where we're at. Again, I want to be at the E above the B that we tuned the top to. It's like we're already tuned to the F, so everything needs to go down. I'm going to turn it down about a quarter turn, and we should have to turn it up a little bit to get it back seated. Still a little bit high. I'm going to do another quarter turn. All right, we're at a D sharp, but almost to an F. So now you turn it up maybe just an eighth or a 16th of a turn on each of the lugs so that we get to E. All right, so we're right at E, 330 hertz. You see that? So that's our bottom. So we've got the top at B, the bottom at E. Now we can do a little bit of hitting the snare drum, hear what it sounds like. Now I'll talk about the snare wires. I've got certainly a really loud snare drum. This might benefit from tuning it up a little bit more. That kind of choke off the sound to give it more crack. But I'm gonna leave the tuning where it's at. Let's talk about some of the products we can use to get rid of some of the excessive ringing. The first thing is the throttle on the side of the snare drum. This is what controls the snare wires. If they're too loose, you'll hear more of your snare drum sounding like a tom. It'll sound like this. All right, so I'm gonna start with the snare wires way too loose and I'll tighten it from there. Now we need to talk about using some product. Before we do, I'm going to stick a microphone on this thing so you can hear what it sounds like coming through the SM7. So now I've got my snare drum mic'd up. It is a B on the top, and then the bottom is an E, which is a fourth above the E. This is a kind of a medium to low tuning for the snare drum. I remember in previous videos we've gotten as high as G on the snare drum, or a C at least. So it could turn it up a little bit more, but I'm gonna see how it feels with the drumsticks as it is. There's no dampening, we've not got any moon gel, anything like that at all. Ringing you're hearing, there's ways to treat it. So typically one of the routes is going with moon gel. Moon gel comes in these little containers, and certainly it's the most sticky of all the options. So you get these little, I don't know what the material is called, but you get these little squares and they're kind of gooey, but they're not going to leave any residue. I'm going to typically just stick it at the top of the drum. So this is with one piece of moon gel. It's going to dampen some of that ringing that we get. Already with one piece of moon gel, that's probably a sufficient sound, especially if you're playing somewhere like a church. Try to go for more moon gel to get rid of some of that ringing. Let's go with 2 pieces of moon gel. While we're at it, typically in these little containers, you'll get at least 5 pieces, I'm pretty sure. So I'm gonna spread them out, probably 2 lugs separated from each of the moon gels. Let's take a listen. So that's with 2 pieces of moon gel. The great thing about moon gel, like I was mentioning, it is sticky, but it doesn't leave any residue. So it will feel sticky when you're putting it on. That helps it stay in place. There's this one company that's got one called True Tones. This kind of comes in a little kit. They have varying sizes as well. When it comes to moon gel, try not to tear it apart. I've torn apart pieces of moon gel before. It doesn't end up being worth it because the little pieces, they get lost that much easier. This company from True Tones, they have smaller pieces that can be stacked together and also divided. They're not as sticky as moon gel. So the downside of these, if you're thinking about getting something like that, is that they bounce around and you're going to lose these a lot more often. But this is comparatively about the same size as some of the moon gel. Let's put one of those on there. I don't know if you can see in the video, but this was bouncing around all over the place. So the more it's bouncing around, the more often you're probably going to end up losing it. So I'd probably stick with the moon gel. This one is my favorite. So this is called gaff tape or gaffer tape. Gaff tape is awesome. You can use it for all sorts of things in the studio. It's not like electrical tape. It doesn't leave any residue or gunky stuff when you're done with it. But in a lot of ways, it seems to be a lot stronger as well. You use this a lot of times in live situations. You need to use some tape to tape down some cables so people don't trip over things. You'll see gaffer tape or gaff tape all over the place. But on the snare drum, one of the easiest things you can do is just take a little section of it, tear off some gaff tape, and you want to kind of roll it into a booklet of such. So here I've got a little section with no sticky side, so all the stickiness is on the inside. I've created a little bit of a wallet. And then I'm going to take a second section of gaff tape and tape this to that. So effectively we have like a cushioned side right here. I don't know if you can see that, but there's the tough or flat section. This is not sticky at all. And then this section here is sticky. So what I'm going to do on the snare drum is I'll typically do it where you can see it here. I'm going to take the sticky side and wrap it around where the lugs are, so that the only sticky part is actually sticking to the hoop of the drum, not actually the drum head itself. It's going to have a bounce effect to it, so a lot of people would use like wallets for the same kind of effect. So when I hit the snare drum, the piece of gaff tape will float up, and then when it lands, it kind of removes that sound. So it's not as dampening as the moon gel, because it has movement to it, but because we've taped it to the side of the hoop, it'll stay in place. Let's take a listen to what that sounds like. Again, this is roughly the same size as the moon gel. It's just gaff tape on gaff tape. Getting a lot of the rim on some of those. Typically not playing drums in my computer chair. So definitely benefits of gaff tape. I believe this will go for about 20 bucks, but you'll use this thing for probably the rest of your life. And then also if you want to just take a big chunk of gaff tape, you can also just tape it onto the drum head itself. So now we've got the gaff tape on the side that's kind of moving with the snare drum, and we've got the taped off section that's just stagnant. It's certainly a drier sound, might be my favorite. I would have to compare it between that and the moon gel. Really could go either way. So I hope that's given you some ideas on how to get a better sounding snare drum. When in doubt, get yourself a tool like this. The TuneBot travels with you. You can put it in your stick case as well. And you can also save your presets. So if you have certain tunings that you really like for your drum kit, you can load these on here as well. And you can also use other people's kits, because on the website, they have a manual with all sorts of different drummers and professionals that have loaded their settings for their TuneBot as well. Hope you got a lot out of the video. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope your snare drum sounding better than ever. For more videos just like this, hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.